the last sliver of the sun, a bruised plum against the horizon, surrendered to the creeping tendrils of twilight over Arkham-Ridge. An unnatural quiet, a hush that felt less like peace and more like a held breath, descended upon the town. Silas Blackwood, a young man whose sharp intellect was often overshadowed by a singular, almost feverish obsession with the occult architecture of his ancestors, had been drawn, as if by an invisible thread, to the crumbling Blackwood Observatory. This ancient stone behemoth, perched precariously on a windswept cliff, was less a building and more a monument to a forgotten age, riddled with strange angles and alignments that defied conventional design. Legends whispered that Silas's distant forebear, a recluse named Thaddeus Blackwood, had not merely observed the stars from its towering dome, but had sought to chart the very pathways between worlds. Tonight, Silas believed he was on the precipice of a monumental discovery, meticulously comparing a set of cryptic, hand-drawn celestial charts, unearthed from a hidden compartment within the observatory's dusty library, with the current positions of the stars. The only sounds for hours had been the rhythmic scratching of his pen across aged parchment, the distant, mournful wail of the ocean against the jagged rocks far below, and the occasional creak of the old timbers settling. A sudden, profound drop in temperature cut through the dense air, a chill that had nothing to do with the encroaching autumn night. It sank into Silas's bones, raising goosebumps on his arms despite the thick wool sweater he wore. His breath plumed in the air, a visible sign of an unnatural cold. The single lantern, his only source of light, flickered violently, its flame dancing and elongating as if pulled by an unseen current. The shadows it cast, usually inert and static, now seemed to writhe, stretching and contracting with a disturbing, almost sentient life. They elongated into gaunt, distorted figures that pressed against the walls, their forms just beyond clear perception. Silas's gaze darted to the dome above, its broken panes of glass allowing the oppressive darkness of the outside world to seep in. A growing sense of primal unease, cold and sharp, pierced through his intellectual curiosity. He felt a deep-seated wrongness, a violation of natural order. It was then, amidst the sudden silence that had fallen, broken only by a faint, almost imperceptible tap-tap scratch from behind one of the larger, rusted telescopes, that Silas Blackwood vanished. The overturned lantern continued to cast its erratic, flickering light, illuminating only the empty space where he had stood, the open notebook lying beside it, its last page covered in frantic, indecipherable scrawls, ending abruptly, mid-symbol. The only remaining trace of him was the unsettling quiet, now profound and absolute, and the faint coppery tang that lingered in the frigid air. The disappearance of Silas Blackwood rippled through Arkham-Ridge, not like a sudden shockwave, but like a slow, insidious sickness. The initial searches were perfunctory, almost ritualistic. Local Sheriff Elias Thorne, a man whose face was etched with years of battling the town's silent, pervasive melancholy, dispatched deputies into the dense, fog-shrouded woods and along the treacherous cliffs. They found nothing. No footprints on the muddy path leading to the observatory that hadn't already been churned by their own boots. No sign of struggle, no discarded items, nothing that suggested an accident or foul play. It was as if Silas had simply ceased to exist, swallowed by the very air. The official conclusion, a hushed consensus among the authorities and a weary acceptance by the few townsfolk brave enough to voice an opinion, was that the young man had likely met with a tragic fall from the cliff face, his body lost to the churning, unforgiving depths of the sea below. But the older residents of Arkham-Ridge, those whose families had lived for generations beneath the town's oppressive fogs and grim legends, harbored far more disquieting theories. They spoke in hushed tones, behind cupped hands, of strange lights seen near the Blackwood Observatory on the very night Silas vanished, shimmering, unearthly luminescence that pulsed with a rhythm alien to any known earthly source. Tales of eerie, discordant music, like the scraping of bone against stone, were carried on the persistent, damp wind, seemingly emanating from the direction of the cliffs. And then there were the accounts, whispered with a chilling conviction, of shadows that moved with impossible speed and defied the natural laws of light and physics, appearing and vanishing in the periphery of vision, too swift to grasp, yet leaving behind an indelible imprint of wrongness. Amelia Stone, a sharp-witted and unyielding freelance journalist, arrived in Arkham-Ridge 2 weeks after Silas's disappearance. Her editor, a cynical veteran of countless sensationalized headlines, had dismissed the assignment as a mundane missing persons case, perhaps a run-of-the-mill runaway or a tragic misstep. But Amelia, with her finely tuned instincts for the unusual, felt an immediate and profound pull toward the mystery. From the moment her rental car rumbled over the old wooden bridge that spanned the murky Arkham River, a sense of foreboding settled deep within her. The oppressive, almost palpable fog that perpetually clung to the town's low-lying streets felt less like a natural phenomenon and more like a shroud, actively concealing something. The townsfolk, she quickly observed, were not merely reserved. They were reticent, their eyes holding an unsettling mixture of deep-seated fear and an almost fanatical superstition. They spoke in hushed, fragmented sentences about the Blackwood family, their long and controversial history in the town, and the observatory's dark past, dropping hints about ancient rituals, forbidden knowledge, and things that were best left undisturbed, even unspoken. Amelia soon realized that the true story of Silas's vanishing was not to be found in police reports or official statements. It was buried, like something festering, beneath layers of local folklore, collective denial, and a palpable sense of dread that permeated the very fabric of Arkham-Ridge, poisoning the air and bending the light itself. The mundane reality was but a thin veneer, easily shattered by the growing chorus of inexplicable occurrences. Driven by an insatiable curiosity that bordered on obsession, Amelia decided to retrace Silas's final footsteps. The path to the Blackwood Observatory was even more arduous than she had imagined. A ribbon of crumbling earth and jagged rock snaking upward through a dense primeval forest. Overgrown vegetation, thick with thorny bushes and gnarled skeletal trees, clawed at the air, their branches reaching like ghoulish fingers to impede her progress. The ascent was precarious, each step a testament to the observatory's isolation and the town's neglect. As she climbed higher, the air grew progressively colder and heavier, pressing down on her, robbing her of breath. The pervasive silence deepened, becoming an oppressive force, broken only by the mournful, guttural cries of unseen seagulls circling high above the churning gray-green sea. The observatory itself loomed into view through a momentary thinning of the fog, a grotesque Gothic silhouette against the bruised twilight sky. Its darkened, empty window panes resembled vacant eyes, staring out with an expression of ancient, forgotten agony at the turbulent, unyielding sea below. A palpable sense of age, decay, and profound malevolence clung to the very stones of the edifice. The heavy wooden door, once grand but now splintered and warped, hung precariously from rusted, groaning hinges, creaking mournfully in the persistent wind. It seemed to sigh as Amelia pushed it open, revealing a gaping maw of oppressive darkness. The interior was plunged into an absolute, suffocating gloom, the air thick and stagnant, heavy with the cloying smell of centuries of dust, deep-seated mildew, and something else, a faint metallic tang, like old blood or ozone, that Amelia couldn't quite place. Her flashlight beam, a solitary beacon against the encroaching void, danced across the cavernous, decaying room, revealing grotesque forms in the deep shadows. She saw crumbling scientific instruments, their brass tarnished and green with age, tattered indecipherable star charts still clinging to the walls, and a thick, undisturbed layer of dust that spoke not merely of years, but of forgotten centuries of abandonment. A profound sense of desolation, of forgotten knowledge and unspeakable truths, permeated the space. It felt as though Silas had been the only living soul to disturb its slumber in an eternity, and the air hummed with a nascent, ancient power that had only just begun to stir, responding to her presence with a subtle shift in its cold, oppressive weight. Amidst the detritus of forgotten scientific inquiry and the crumbling remnants of astronomical ambition, Amelia's persistent search led her to a small, water-damaged wooden trunk tucked away almost imperceptibly in a shadowed corner. It was half buried beneath a pile of fallen plaster and splintered wood, as if deliberately hidden or simply consumed by the observatory's slow decay. Her fingers, trembling slightly with anticipation and a growing sense of dread, fumbled with the rusted latch. Inside, carefully wrapped in layers of brittle yellowed oilcloth that disintegrated at her touch, were Silas's personal effects. A leather-bound journal, its cover worn smooth by countless hours of handling, and a stack of meticulously compiled, though now discolored and damp-stained, notebooks. Their pages, filled with Silas's distinctive, initially precise and elegant handwriting, offered an increasingly disturbing and horrifying glimpse into the young man's spiraling obsession. Early entries in the journal were filled with the expected academic rigor. Detailed observations of celestial events, complex mathematical calculations, and intricate architectural sketches of the observatory itself. These drawings, however, were punctuated by meticulous notations of peculiar structural anomalies, non-Euclidean angles in the stonework that seemed to defy the laws of geometry, and strange, unaligned apertures that appeared to gaze not at the sky, but into some other unfathomable dimension. As Amelia progressed through the volumes, the tone shifted. Silas's handwriting became noticeably more erratic, his once neat script devolving into a feverish scrawl. His scientific observations began to intertwine with esoteric, almost delirious, theories drawn from obscure, unnamed texts on forgotten mythologies, pre-human religions, and forbidden philosophical treatises. He wrote with terrifying conviction of cosmic harmonies that vibrated just beyond human hearing, of dimensional rifts that opened in the very fabric of reality, and of ancient, grotesque entities that dwelled in the abyssal spaces beyond the veil of human perception. Most chillingly, he theorized about the Blackwood Observatory's true purpose. Not merely an astronomical tool, but a focal point, a nexus, a conduit through which these unseen energies and entities could manifest. The later entries in the final notebook were a chaotic, fragmented mess, a chilling descent into what could only be described as utter madness. Pages were filled with cryptic, repeating symbols that seemed to pulse with a malevolent energy. Frantic, unanswerable questions scrawled in margins, and disturbing, amateurish sketches of non-human figures with unsettlingly elongated limbs. Disproportionate features and vacant, utterly soulless eyes. Some of these figures seemed to be merging with the very shadows, their forms indistinct and shifting. The last few pages were a chaotic jumble of words and drawings, a final desperate outpouring of terror and revelation. The ink was smudged, as if written in haste or agony, ending abruptly mid-symbol, leaving a chilling void. Then, on the very last page, a single horrifying sentence, scrawled in large, uneven, almost childish letters, seemed to scream from the page, "They hear the whispers now, and they are coming for us all." The paper felt cold beneath her fingers, as if imbued with the chill of Silas's final moments. As Amelia absorbed the profoundly disturbing contents of Silas's notebooks, a subtle yet utterly terrifying shift occurred within the very fabric of the observatory. The pervasive cold, already bone-chilling, intensified, sinking deeper into her, wrapping around her like an icy shroud that tightened with each passing second. It was no longer merely the cold of an old, unheated building. It was a cold that radiated from within the very stones, a preternatural chill that seemed to emanate from a source beyond any earthly explanation. The unsettling sensation of being watched, which had been a vague prickle on her skin, became an unbearable weight, a distinct and horrifying awareness of unseen eyes fixed upon her, scrutinizing her every move from the deepest, most opaque shadows. She felt a profound violation, as if her very presence was being consumed, analyzed, by something ancient and malignant. The faint whispers, which had been an almost imperceptible background hum upon her arrival, now seemed to coalesce into coherent, though still utterly unintelligible murmurs. They slithered and coiled around her, a cacophony of sibilant voices that echoed through the vast, crumbling chamber of the dome. It was a chorus of forgotten secrets and ancient malevolence, a chorus that seemed to whisper not to her, but through her. stirring a deep-seated dread in her very soul. The shadows themselves, already long and distorted by her wavering flashlight, appeared to deepen and lengthen with an unnerving sentience, stretching like grasping skeletal tendrils towards her, attempting to consume the limited light. They writhed and shifted, taking on amorphous, unsettling forms that were just beyond clear perception, always on the edge of her peripheral vision. A low, guttural hum, a deep, resonant vibration, began to emanate from the very floorboards beneath her feet. It was a sound that seemed to resonate not in the air, but within her very bones. A sub-audible frequency that stirred a primal, animalistic fear she had never known. The rhythmic scratching she had heard earlier, which she had initially dismissed as the mundane creaking of an old building, now returned with an alarming intensity, louder, closer, emanating from the very walls themselves. It was a frantic, desperate tap, tap, scratch, drag, as if something was attempting to claw its way into the observatory, or perhaps to communicate with a terrifying urgency. A profound sense of dread, a chilling certainty that went beyond mere logical deduction, settled upon Amelia. Silas had not simply disappeared. In his reckless pursuit of forbidden knowledge, he had not merely discovered something, he had awakened something. Something ancient, malevolent, and utterly alien. And now that nameless horror lingered within the very fabric of the observatory, its presence a palpable weight, a suffocating force that pressed in on her, its gaze fixed, its hunger stirring. Stumbling out of the Blackwood Observatory was like tearing herself free from the clutches of a waking nightmare, only to realize that the reality she emerged into had been irrevocably tainted. The crisp autumn air now felt heavy, tainted with the coppery tang she had first noticed inside. The familiar streets of Arkham-Ridge, with their quaint colonial architecture and cobblestone paths, now seemed alien, bathed in an ominous, almost sickly glow, as the last vestiges of daylight surrendered completely to the encroaching, unnatural darkness. The fog, a constant companion in Arkham-Ridge, no longer felt like a comforting shroud. It was a living, breathing entity, coiling and pressing in, concealing horrors that lurked just beyond the veil of perception. The whispers, which had been faint and indistinct echoes on the wind, now assailed her ears with an undeniable clarity, a cacophony of spectral voices that seemed to emanate from every alleyway, from every darkened window, from the very stones beneath her feet. They were not human voices, but something far older, more resonant, a chorus of sibilant, guttural sounds that scraped against her sanity. And the shadows, they were no longer content to merely dance or shift. They stretched and writhed with an almost palpable hunger, tendrils of darkness that seemed to pull at the very fabric of the world, elongating, twisting, forming grotesque caricatures of human forms that darted across alleyways and peered from the black depths of unlit doorways. They vanished the instant her gaze fixed upon them, yet left behind a chilling imprint on her mind. The townsfolk, whom she had casually interviewed just hours before, now seemed irrevocably changed. Their faces, once etched with the simple weariness of coastal life, were now clouded with a vacant, almost catatonic fear. Their eyes, once capable of warmth or suspicion, were now wide, unfocused, and strangely blank, as if their thoughts were elsewhere, tuned to some unseen, maddening frequency. Their responses were vague, disjointed, and often interrupted by sudden shivers or faraway glances, as if they were listening to a conversation only they could hear. Amelia began to notice strange symbols scrawled on the weathered walls of buildings, on the splintered wood of docks, and even on the fogged-up windows of abandoned storefronts. These symbols, crude yet chillingly precise, matched those in Silas's later, more deranged notebooks. Cryptic markings that seemed to pulse with an unsettling internal energy, almost glowing faintly in the deepening gloom. Sleep offered no respite. Her nights became a torment of vivid, horrifying dreams, filled with swirling mists that choked her, whispering voices that promised unspeakable horrors, and the chilling image of vacant, staring eyes that emerged from the darkest corners of her subconscious. The line between waking reality and nightmare began to blur with alarming rapidity. She would jolt awake, heart hammering, convinced she could still hear the whispers or see the writhing shadows at the edge of her vision. A profound and growing sense of terror, sharper and more immediate than any she had known, settled upon Amelia. She realized with a chilling certainty that the malevolent entity Silas had inadvertently unleashed was not confined to the ancient, crumbling Blackwood Observatory. It was spreading like a cancerous shadow through the very heart of Arkham-Ridge, its influence seeping into the minds and souls of its inhabitants, bending reality to its will. Her investigation into a simple missing persons case had, in a terrifyingly short span, transformed into a desperate, solitary fight for the very soul of the town, and perhaps for her own sanity. The whispers grew louder, more insistent, no longer just a background hum, but a clear, though still undecipherable chorus. The very air itself seemed alive with a malevolent intelligence, eager to claim another victim. And Amelia, now inextricably linked to the unfolding horror, felt its cold breath on her neck. As days turned into a blur of fog and mounting dread, Arkham-Ridge began to succumb to the invisible tide of corruption. The subtle changes Amelia had observed in the townsfolk sharpened into grotesque distortions. Their eyes, once merely vacant, now held a disturbing, manic gleam. Their hushed whispers escalated into fragmented, nonsensical babbling, or sudden outbursts of chilling, unprovoked laughter that echoed eerily through the empty streets. Many began to congregate in the town square, drawn by an unseen force, standing motionless for hours, their faces upturned to the perpetual gray sky, as if listening to a silent sermon. Others wandered aimlessly, muttering to themselves, their movements jerky and unnatural, their limbs seeming unfamiliar to them, reminiscent of the shambling figures Silas had sketched. The once bustling fishing docks, the lifeblood of Arkham-Ridge, lay abandoned, fishing boats left to rot in their berths, their nets tangled and forgotten. The few shops that remained open operated under a shroud of fear, their owners' faces pale and drawn, their hands trembling as they served the rare, silent customers. The strange symbols, first seen in Silas's notebooks, now proliferated, appearing scrawled in crude chalk on storefront windows, carved into the bark of ancient trees, and even etched into the damp sand of the beaches, always facing the direction of the Blackwood Observatory. They seemed to hum faintly in the periphery of Amelia's vision, pulling at her sanity, inviting her to decipher their dark meaning. Amelia's own sleep was now a battlefield. The nightmares were no longer just unsettling. They were vivid, tactile assaults on her mind. She saw Silas, his face contorted in silent agony, his eyes staring blankly at the swirling mist that consumed him. She felt the cold tendrils of the shadows wrapping around her, heard the collective, sibilant whispers growing louder, morphing into a chorus of unholy praise. She would wake in a cold sweat, clutching her throat, convinced she could still feel phantom hands closing around her. The fear was a constant companion, a dull ache beneath her ribs, but it was overshadowed by a grim determination. She knew she couldn't leave, not yet. Not when the answers, however terrifying, felt so close, so inextricably linked to the fate of this doomed town. She began to carry a small antique camera, hoping to capture proof of the unsettling changes, though the resulting photographs always came out blurred, distorted, or strangely devoid of life, as if the camera itself recoiled from the abnormality. Amelia returned to the observatory several times, each visit more unnerving than the last. She found herself drawn deeper into Silas's work, trying to understand the exact nature of what he had uncovered. His later notebook spoke of dimensional resonance and the Great Confluence, a point in time when the veil between realities would thin to its weakest. He had meticulously calculated this moment, believing it offered a unique opportunity to cross over, to witness forbidden truths. But he had not anticipated the true cost. He hadn't realized that by opening the door, he would also allow something to slip through. Among his fragmented notes, Amelia discovered sketches of a complex, three-dimensional geometric structure, something he called a harmonic resonator. It wasn't a physical machine, but a conceptual design, a pattern to be created through specific alignments of objects and energies. Silas believed it could amplify the energies of the confluence, allowing for clearer passage. But as Amelia studied the drawings, a horrifying thought occurred to her. What if the resonator wasn't for passage at all? What if it was a beacon? A magnet? Something designed, perhaps unwittingly, to draw something here. And what if, in his frantic final moments, Silas had tried to reverse it or destroy it, only to be consumed by the very thing he sought to understand? She found further, grimmer evidence. In a hidden compartment beneath the loose floorboard in the observatory's main chamber, Amelia unearthed a collection of objects. Not instruments, but strange, organic-looking artifacts. Polished black stones that hummed faintly to the touch. Dried, gnarled roots that seemed to pulse with a faint internal light, and a collection of ancient, corroded bronze bells, their surfaces etched with the same unsettling symbols she now saw across town. These were the components Silas referred to, the elements of his resonator. They weren't just theoretical. He had begun to assemble them. And as Amelia touched one of the bells, a wave of disorienting sensory overload washed over her. A cacophony of the whispers, now a deafening roar, flashing images of impossibly vast alien landscapes, and a sickening feeling of profound wrongness. She recoiled, gasping for breath, the objects seeming to hum with a malevolent life of their own. The physical deterioration of Arkham-Ridge mirrored the psychological decline of its inhabitants. A gray, sickly pallor began to leach into the very colors of the town. The vibrant greens of the coastal foliage withered and turned black. The clear waters of the harbor became murky and stagnant, reflecting the leaden sky like a mirror of despair. The once sturdy wooden houses began to sag, their paint peeling in unsightly blotches, their timbers groaning as if in pain. A pervasive, sweet sickly odor, like decaying flowers and damp earth, began to hang in the air, thick and cloying, refusing to dissipate even with the strongest winds. The townsfolk, now almost universally affected, had developed peculiar, unsettling habits. Some gathered daily by the shore, staring blankly at the ceaseless fog, occasionally reaching out their hands as if to grasp at something unseen within its swirling depths. Others were drawn to the overgrown cemetery on the outskirts of town, where they would spend hours tending to unmarked graves, humming discordant, mournful tunes. A significant number, however, were drawn to the Blackwood Observatory. Amelia observed them from a distance, hidden amongst the gnarled trees, as they formed silent, swaying processions up the winding path. They carried small, personal items. A child's worn doll, a faded photograph, a cluster of dried herbs, which they would leave at the observatory's base, like offerings to an unseen deity. Their faces were devoid of emotion, their movements sluggish, as if they were puppets controlled by invisible strings. Amelia found a grim ally in an unexpected place, the town's reclusive librarian, Alara Vance. Alara was an elderly woman, her face a roadmap of wrinkles, her eyes sharp and knowing. She had lived in Arkham-Ridge her entire life, a silent observer of its slow descent into strange madness. When Amelia sought her out, presenting the terrifying evidence from Silas's notebooks and describing the town's growing blight, Alara listened with a weary, almost resigned expression. "The Blackwoods," she rasped, her voice like dry leaves. "They always thought they could control it. They always thought they were clever enough." Alara revealed that the observatory was indeed built on an ancient convergence point, a place where the barriers between dimensions were naturally thin. The Blackwood family, she explained, were not just astronomers. They were a lineage of mystics and ritualists who, for generations, had attempted to harness these energies, to communicate with entities beyond. Their history was littered with disappearances, madness, and unexplained phenomena. Silas, it seemed, had simply gone too far, tried to open a door that had been barely sealed by his ancestors. Alara possessed a collection of ancient family grimoires, hidden away in the library's deepest archives. Texts that detailed the Blackwood family's pacts, their successes, and their ultimate failures. She warned Amelia that the whispers were the voices of the entities, reaching out, calling, drawing people to themselves. And the symbols? They were a form of ancient pre-human script, a language of power that the entities used to exert their influence, to reshape reality. The more they were drawn, the more the veil thinned, the more Arkham-Ridge would become like the entity's own world. The town was no longer merely changed, it was actively unraveling. The thick fog, once a characteristic of Arkham-Ridge, now solidified, sometimes forming strange ephemeral shapes that hovered just out of sight, dissolving before they could be clearly perceived. The whispers, omnipresent and maddening, began to coalesce, forming grotesque, discordant melodies that grated on the nerves. A symphony of discord that echoed from every shadowed alley. Electrical power became intermittent, flickering wildly before dying out for hours, then days at a time. The few remaining telephones were dead, their lines severed by an unseen force, plunging Arkham-Ridge into an isolating void. Amelia and Alara spent their nights poring over the Blackwood grimoires, their only light a sputtering oil lamp. The texts were horrifying, detailing elaborate rituals that involved lunar cycles, specific constellations, and chillingly, human sacrifice to open the channels and receive the blessings of the beings from beyond. Ilara translated passages describing the entities as those who dwell beyond the stars, formless, ancient intelligences that existed in a realm of pure thought and maddening geometry. They sought only to expand their influence, to merge their reality with ours, using the minds of the living as conduits. Silas, it seemed, had stumbled upon a method to force a wider, more unstable connection, and in doing so had become the first unwitting sacrifice. The symbols were indeed a language, a form of mental contagion that, once seen and internalized, began to reprogram the human mind, drawing it into a terrifying alignment with the entity's will. One particularly horrifying section detailed a great conjunction, a rare celestial event that would create a perfect alignment, a moment when the veil would not just thin, but tear. It was happening soon. The ancient texts described the outcome. Arkham-Ridge would become a threshold, a permanent gateway, and its inhabitants would be transformed into grotesque, shambling forms, their minds utterly consumed, their bodies merely vessels for the entity's will. A terrifying realization dawned on Amelia. The current state of the townsfolk wasn't just madness. It was a slow, agonizing transformation, a prelude to their complete assimilation. The rituals, the offerings at the observatory, the strange symbols. These were not acts of defiance, but acts of subconscious obeisance, guided by the entity's insidious influence. As the date of the Great Conjunction approached, the remaining untouched residents of Arkham-Ridge dwindled. Fear had driven some to flee, though many never made it past the town limits, their fates unknown. Others simply succumbed to the whispers, joining the ranks of the wandering, muttering figures. Amelia and Alara, holed up in the library, became desperate. Ilara, her ancient knowledge a beacon in the encroaching darkness, spoke of a counter-ritual, of forgotten lore found deep within the grimoires that might, just might, seal the breach. It required a sacrifice, not of life, but of specific artifacts, objects imbued with intense personal significance, and a complex sequence of vocalizations. A song of binding that had to be sung at the observatory at the precise moment of the conjunction. But the ritual was dangerous, untested in centuries, and warned of potentially catastrophic consequences if performed incorrectly. The library, once a sanctuary, became a fortress. The air was thick with the scent of old paper and the metallic tang that seemed to follow the entities. The sounds from outside were a constant reminder of their looming threat. The collective, mindless moans of the transformed townsfolk. The scraping sounds of their strange, shuffling gait on the cobblestones, and the rhythmic, unnerving thump, thump, thump that seemed to emanate from the very ground, as if something gargantuan was approaching the town. Amelia's hands trembled as she helped Alara gather the required items. A tarnished silver locket that had belonged to Alara's lost sister, a child's wooden toy boat from a forgotten family, and a worn compass that had guided sailors through. generations of Arkham-Ridge fogs. Each item felt cold to the touch, humming faintly with a strange energy. On the night of the conjunction, the fog was denser than ever, a suffocating blanket that swallowed all light and sound. The air crackled with an unseen energy, a profound pressure that pressed in on their skulls. The whispers were no longer whispers. They were a thunderous, incoherent roar, a multitude of voices screaming in alien tongues, pressing against the very windows of the library. Amelia and Alara made their perilous journey to the observatory, navigating through the labyrinthine streets now populated by the shambling, transformed figures. Their eyes glowed with an unsettling pale luminescence, their forms distorted and elongated by the perpetual gloom. They reached out with slow, grasping movements, their mouths agape, uttering sounds that were once human words, now mangled and alien. Amelia felt a profound sorrow for these lost souls, once her neighbors, now merely puppets. The ascent to the observatory was a harrowing gauntlet. The transformed townsfolk, drawn by the increasing power emanating from the conjunction, converged on the path. Their numbers were terrifying, a silent, shuffling tide of what was once humanity, their vacant eyes reflecting the unnatural glow of the celestial alignment. Their moans were not of pain, but of a low, guttural satisfaction, a sound that seemed to vibrate in Amelia's chest. Alara, leaning heavily on Amelia, began to chant, her voice surprisingly strong, a low, guttural melody in an ancient, forgotten tongue. The chant seemed to cause the approaching figures to hesitate, their movements becoming more jerky and confused, as if battling an unseen force. Inside the observatory, the air was a maelstrom of unseen energies. The geometric symbols etched on the walls pulsed with an angry, crimson light. The whispers were a deafening, disorienting roar, a symphony of alien consciousness pressing into her very mind, threatening to shatter it. The harmonic resonator, Silas's unintended beacon, shimmered in the center of the main chamber, its components, the black stones, the gnarled roots, the corroded bells, now levitating slightly above the floor, throbbing with a sickly, purple light. From the broken dome, a swirling vortex of deep purple and sickly green light began to form, expanding slowly, revealing glimpses of a vast alien landscape beyond. Impossible angles, shifting colors, and the faint monstrous silhouettes of unnameable things. This was the threshold. This was the tier. Ilara, her face pale but resolute, began the precise counter-ritual. She placed the locket, the toy boat, and the compass onto a crumbling stone altar in the center of the room, reciting intricate incantations. As she spoke, the artifacts began to glow with a faint blue light, their energy seemingly fighting against the encroaching purple. Amelia, guided by Alara's stern gaze, began to sing the Song of Binding, a haunting, melodic sequence of notes that seemed to vibrate deep within the very structure of the observatory. Her voice, though trembling with fear, grew stronger with each note, weaving a protective lattice of sound around them. The entity's whispers intensified, lashing out like whips, attempting to break her concentration, to fill her mind with maddening images. The shadows in the room writhed more violently, striking at them, yet repelled by the shimmering barrier of Alara's chant and Amelia's song. The vortex in the dome pulsed faster, growing larger, its pull almost irresistible. Amelia felt a powerful mental tug, a desire to surrender, to embrace the alien consciousness, to finally understand. But she held on, focusing on Alara's unwavering gaze, on the specific notes of the song, on the words that now felt as ancient as the stones themselves. As her song reached its crescendo, the blue light from the artifacts flared, momentarily overpowering the purple glow of the resonator. The vortex in the dome shuddered, contracting violently, as if in agony. A deafening shriek, like a million voices screaming in unison, tore through the observatory. A sound that was not of this world, a sound of pure, unadulterated rage and frustration. The very walls of the observatory cracked, dust and debris raining down, the structure groaning under the immense unseen pressure. The shriek subsided, replaced by an eerie, profound silence. The vortex in the dome, once a swirling maw to another dimension, had shrunk to a flickering point of light, then vanished entirely. The harmonic resonator on the floor clattered to the ground, its components inert and lifeless. The black stones dull, the roots withered, the bells silent. The angry crimson light of the symbols on the walls faded, replaced by their original innocuous carvings. The oppressive cold remained, but it no longer felt sentient, merely the chill of a ruined building. Alara collapsed, her energy utterly spent, breathing in shallow, ragged gasps. Amelia, her throat raw from singing, felt a profound emptiness, a mental and emotional exhaustion that settled deep within her. They waited, breathless, for what felt like an eternity. No more whispers, no more shadows, no more moans from outside. When the first tentative rays of dawn pierced through the broken dome, casting weak, pale light into the chamber, they crept out. Arkham-Ridge was still shrouded in fog, but it felt different now, less oppressive, more natural. The sweet, sickly odor had vanished, replaced by the crisp, clean scent of salt and damp earth. The unnatural glow in the sky was gone. The symbols on the houses and docks remained, faded now, like ancient scars, no longer humming with malevolence. The transformed townsfolk were gone. Completely. Not a trace. Had they been drawn back, consumed, or simply vanished with the retreat of the entities? Amelia felt a profound and unsettling uncertainty. Alara explained, her voice weak, that the counter-ritual was not a complete victory. It didn't destroy the entities. It merely pushed them back, sealed the immediate breach. The Great Conjunction would still be a sensitive point, a lingering vulnerability, but the direct, immediate threat to Arkham-Ridge had been averted. The entities had been denied their full manifestation, their complete assimilation of this world, but the scar remained. The town would never be the same. The memory of the terror, though unspoken, would linger in the air, in the eyes of the few remaining unaffected, and the knowledge, the terrifying truth of what lay beyond the veil, would forever haunt those who had witnessed it. Amelia left Arkham-Ridge days later, a changed woman. She wrote her story, but it was not the one her editor expected. It was a chilling, fragmented account of unexplained disappearances, of a town touched by an ancient, unspeakable horror, leaving enough room for doubt, yet enough terrifying detail to resonate deeply. She never mentioned the entities by name, only as the Whispers from Beyond. The story was published, a minor sensation, dismissed by many as sensationalist fiction, but striking a chord with others who felt a deep, unexplainable unease. Amelia kept Silas's notebooks, now her most prized, terrifying possessions, locked away, hidden from prying eyes. She returned to her life, but the experience had left an indelible mark. The occasional flicker of lights, a sudden, inexplicable chill, or a faint, almost imperceptible whisper on the wind. These were enough to remind her that the veil, though mended, was still fragile. And somewhere out there, beyond the stars, those who dwelled beyond the stars were waiting. Their patience infinite, their hunger eternal, for the next time the gate would open, even just a crack. Arkham-Ridge was safe, for now. But the memory, the chilling, existential dread of what humanity might unknowingly brush against, would forever be a part of her. A haunting echo of the day she stared into the abyss, and it whispered back. The town might appear normal now, slowly recovering its mundane rhythm. But for those who had seen, the world was irrevocably larger and far more terrifying than they had ever dared to imagine.